Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War. On to week 145. We got a spoiler in the title once again. The Battle of Arleux. That was not the spoiler. Robert Nivelle gets fired. That's the spoiler. He did not last long. He lasted about a year, which, decent. But there are far more incompetent generals still in charge of armies that, you know, Italy. Hotzendorf only finally got sacked like a few weeks ago when he should have been sacked all the way back in 1914. Anyways, before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Alright, the Battle of Arleux and Robert Nivelle gets fired. Let's dive in.
Just 5 months ago, he was hailed as the savior of France for
It was only 5 months ago? Oh, yeah, only 5 months ago the battle ended.
planning the counterattacks that won at Verdun. And he was raised to French Army Chief of Staff as Joseph Joffre was put out to pasture. And now, it's all over.
I still don't really understand why. Maybe I should say I forget why they fired Joseph Joffre. Because he seemed to be doing a decent job. Like, he was holding the line, and really, that's all you could ask. He was doing better than fucking the Austro-Hungarians, the Italians, the Ottomans, the Russian generals. So the Russians, I'm going to give a bit of slack to. The Russian generals themselves don't seem to be too much of the problem. It seems to be other parts of Russia that are the problem. But yeah, I'd even say Joseph Joffre was a bit better than Douglas Haig.
This week, Robert Nivelle is fired. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the Bulgarians held off the British in the Balkans. The British beat the Ottomans on the Tigris, but lost a lot of men on the Western Front, providing a diversion for the French. France had serious morale issues after...
Hold on, I'm just now noticing the blue up here in Sweden. Why is this blue? Why are they putting that as Russian territory? That's a mistake. And Iceland is blue? But Denmark isn't in the war.
After complete disaster in the field, and in Russia, the situation grows ever more chaotic as Vladimir Lenin has returned from exile. Here's what happened next.
And why do they only have half of the island? This island here. Wasn't this under... It's kind of disputed, but I think it's Finnish at this point in time. It's owned by Finland, I think, by 20th century. Why? Do we got some mistakes on here? Am I just now noticing these little tiny mistakes?
The Western Front was the scene of the week's heaviest action, as it had been for the past 3 weeks. For the British, the Battle of Arleux began on the 29th and lasted a day. This was a part of the Battle of Arras, which was still going on in fits and starts. This was also another opportunity for the Canadian Corps to shine, as they did back on April 9th at Vimy Ridge. See, one position that was now a trouble spot for the British was the Arleux Loop, which was a German salient, jutting in between two British-held salients that had been formed by action last week. The British wanted to link together their salients, thus eliminating the German one, and British Commander-in-Chief Sir Douglas Haig sent 3 divisions to attack by the River Scarpe, another to attack near Oppy, and the Canadians were to assault the loop itself. I'll just say right off the bat that in the words of the British official historian, the Canadian operations were the only tangible success of the whole operation. At 4:25 a.m., 3 Canadian battalions of the 1st Division attacked on a front of about 3 kilometers. Straight away, the 8th Battalion, attacking in the center, lost all of its officers to machine gun fire and was checked by barbed wire. But the 2 flanking battalions managed to make good enough progress and tie up the enemy so that reserves could be brought in to the center and the village could be secured by 6 a.m. they reinforced it during the day and had RFC patrols in the skies monitoring the enemy. So the Germans decided to withdraw to the Oppy-Mericourt line in front of Fresnoy. I have to be honest, I think it's a bit unfair what the official historians said, since the British positions at Nivelle, for example, withstood a multitude of tough counterattacks by the Germans without faltering. And saying they didn't have any tangible success is sort of silly, since they didn't all die and they were still there at the end of the two-day battle.
Wow, that's what we're calling success. They didn't all die, and they were still, some were still there. Oh.
And a lot worse happened to the British Army later in the week anyhow at the Third Battle of the Scarpe, another engagement of the larger battle. This was a two-pronged attack, with the British attacking east from Monchy, hoping to take the Wotanstellung, a German defensive position, while the Australians again attacked Bullecourt. The attacks were failures with heavy casualties, with estimates of up to 5,900 dead for one day.
I mean, that's not that bad.
The official history says the reasons for failure from Monchy were the confusion caused by the darkness, the speed with which the German artillery opened fire, the manner in which it concentrated on the British infantry, almost neglecting the artillery, the intensity of its fire, the heaviest that many a soldier had ever witnessed, seemingly unchecked by British counter-battery fire, and lasting without slackening for 15 hours. The readiness with which the German infantry yielded to the first assault, and the energy of its counterattack, and, it must be added, the bewilderment of the British infantry on finding itself in the open. That last part is interesting because we know the new German defensive doctrines that go with their new defenses. These were deep and they were flexible, and the idea was to draw the enemy into a deep killing zone, which they certainly did here. The German infantry yielded to the first assault and fell back, and if the British wanted to take any ground, they had to move ahead right into the killing zone. How were they going to beat the system? Because this obviously didn't work. And they'd better get used to being in the open, because when the Germans fall back, that's the only way forward. Another side note here. Haig supposedly wrote in his diary the day before the attack, May the 2nd, that he had misgivings about it. Haig had misgivings about one of his offensives. That says something right there. The Bullecourt attack had actually been...
I'm here for the Douglas Haig slander. I love it. I love it.
Planned to go off a couple of weeks ago, but kept on getting pushed back. There, it was 1st Anzac and 62nd British Divisions who attacked in wave after wave. The Anzacs broke through the barbed wire to find many of their dead comrades still lying there from last month's attack.
Ooh.
But they couldn't really break out of the barbed wire, though one brigade managed to take around 400 meters of the German first line. The end result of the first day was pretty much the same tragedy as last month, but the end of the week saw the British again strengthening their position for further assaults. The French also launched a new attack on the Western Front this week, at the very end of the week, taking Craonne. However, this was not a massive attack on the scale of last month's Nivelle offensive, though it was technically still part of it. Since the initial phase of that offensive had been so disastrous that the French had taken casualties at a rate not seen since autumn 1914, they were now taking on more limited objectives.
Okay, maybe Nivelle did worse than I thought.
One minor reason for the casualties was that the Germans had a lighter version of the 1908 Maxim machine gun, the MG-08-15, with a bipod mounting, a wooden stock, and a pistol grip. I wouldn't call it a great weapon, but it was good enough and in sufficient numbers that the Germans had much better firepower than the French had expected. The French disasters of April had also provoked a change in the high command. On April 28th, French Minister of War Paul Painlevé elevated Philippe Pétain to Chief of Staff of the French Army and asked General Robert Nivelle to resign as Commander-in-Chief. In the French Army, they could actually be different positions. But Nivelle refused to resign. He even continued to refuse after Pétain replaced him as Commander-in-Chief, still assigning blame to everyone but himself. Pétain, though, had bigger things to worry about, as the rumblings of mutiny in the French army were growing louder and louder. There were also such rumblings in the Russian army. On the 29th, Russian Commander-in-Chief Mikhail Alexeyev told the Minister of War that information indicated that the Russian army was falling apart. And by May, there were...
Don't think you need special intelligence information to realize that one.
as many as 2 million deserters.
Damn.
Still, at the beginning of the month,
2
50,000
million?
wounded Russian soldiers demonstrated in favor of the war. And on the 4th, and to Vladimir Lenin's chagrin, the Petrograd Soviet gave its support to the provisional government by a narrow margin. But if Russia wasn't leaving the war, they weren't very active, and Allied morale fell all over, as everyone realized the Americans wouldn't play much of a part for another whole year. And the reason the U.S. had finally joined the war, Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, was going on at sea with near impunity. In April, they had sunk 373 ships for a total tonnage of 870,754 tons, the highest of the war. But yet another side note here. If the Americans weren't there in force, the Canadians were by this time. Their total overseas enlistments now numbered 407,302. And yet, another week of war comes to an end, with heavy death at sea, possible mutiny growing in the French army, even as it has a small success in the field, and a day that will go down in history as a day of disaster, ending the week for the British Army. And yet, another chief of staff for the French. And oh, how the mighty have fallen. Remember the optimism the French government had felt in December when they gave Nivelle the job, even though the actual soldiers were already worried about his lack of concern for high casualty lists? Remember how this whole year he's been chomping at the bit to get his offensive off the ground, not even considering the possibility that the Germans had taken time to develop new defenses and tactics? We've seen arrogance and hubris like this on both sides throughout the war, and it seems it will not end. And now, Nivelle refuses to take any of the blame for his failure. Let's just remember that it was Nivelle who had organized the offensive, and Nivelle who had promised it would break through the Germans in 48 hours with an estimated casualty list of 10,000. The reality had been some 20 times that, and he still refused to call it off for days until the men just would not fight anymore. Imagine the state of the French army by this week. Good luck, Philippe Pétain. If you want to learn more...
And that was the Battle of Arleux. Robert Nivelle gets fired. The Great War Week 145. Again, we were blessed with another Indy rant at the end here. Indy's frustration at the people of the past for being just completely disregarding the lives of other humans. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.